Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is, I don't know what the hell it is. Who knows? Forget it. We're not doing a show. It's Tuesday, April 2nd, 2024. Time for, I now remember that the Morning Post was about, remember when I said I was never going to do any more Eastern Orthodox jokes? Well, I don't know if I ever actually said that. I think I might have just said I cut down on them. But at any rate, remember when that happened? Well, it was all a big lie, because today is Eastern Orthodox April Fool's Day, and, I got you. Okay, there's no such thing as Eastern Orthodox April Fool's Day, and this joke was not made. I'm just like a Trump lawyer at this point. I can just deny the whole thing. There's more action in Trump legal news we can catch up with. Many things happening in many places, in many areas around this country and around the world, which require catching up with. There's an awful lot happening in courtroom action, just in terms of we're on the edge of our seats. Is the judge in New York who has imposed a gag order on Donald Trump going to enforce his gag order? It actually does not look a whole lot like it, although I don't know if anybody knows what it looks like when a judge is about to oppose, or impose the provisions of a gag order, enforce a gag order against a former president. Nobody knows what that looks like exactly. So I guess those close to the judge insist that he's just one of those no-nonsense guys and he doesn't take this stuff lying down. But essentially what happened here, as far as I can tell, and we'll read a little bit about it, but the gag order was issued, and then Trump found somebody who, honestly, he attacked the judge's daughter, which sounds a lot worse than it is when you just leave it hanging out there like that. Oh my God, her little 8-year-old daughter. No, she's an adult and working in Democratic politics, and I guess that was the entree that he used to launch the attack and say that's got to be fair game, even though it doesn't mean anything. But it's supposed to be taken by MAGA troops as, well, if his daughter is involved in Democratic politics, it can't be that he's not also involved in Democratic politics, except it certainly could be. And ordinarily that would be the assumption, but not for MAGA people. The amazing thing is that I guess the order ended up getting expanded yesterday because this judge is so no-nonsense. But what I can't figure out is, was the judge kind of a little bit nonsense when he issued the orders because, and apparently thought he hadn't covered his own family, because that was kind of like the obvious next step. And in fact, this new order, as I, heard a little bit about it, I haven't read through the whole thing by any stretch. This order, too, may have loopholes, and Trump will just try and walk through those loopholes and attack those people. I guess the only thing I can say about it is it seems so obvious, that these loopholes, that I feel like, is there some chance that the judge might be setting them up for some sort of I gave you 3 chances and you every single time you went directly to the people who were just barely peripheral to the gag order and attacked them. And it seems clear what you're doing, and it's a pattern, and I'm going to do something about it. But I don't know. I don't know what. I mean, you are within your rights as a judge to find him in contempt because he will not comply with the gag order and actually throw him in jail to enforce compliance. Fines are available, and I'm sure that the judges, in an abundance of caution, will go that route if they go any route of any punishment at all. Just to be sure, because they're treading on uncertain ground. But I say, why not risk making a teensy-weensy little mistake? I mean, what happens at that point, right? You put him in jail. There's protest, yeah, and he tries. His lawyers immediately just say this is outrageous, and they're going to get this whole thing reversed. They might. of course, these are Trump lawyers. Like, I don't know. How long does it take Alina Habba to get him out of jail? You know, presenting a habeas corpus petition of some sort. I don't know. She's not handling this case, but I don't know. Trump lawyers, man, they're not that good. Test them out. And as I said yesterday, it would have been a great idea to throw him in jail for his comments on Saturday and then say, by the way, courts are closed on Sunday for Easter. Even for an emergency hearing, you're just not going to get one. We'll see you Monday. And then you might as well have told them that, well, we observe Easter Monday here, and courts are going to be closed. We'll see you Tuesday. And then on Tuesday, you say, oh, April Fools, we were open Monday. What do you think, we're idiots? I don't know. Anyway, they didn't take the chance to do that, but there's some coverage of that. Before we even get to that, I guess decorum, I don't know, demands acknowledging that, how do we put it? I don't know. Israel seems determined to lose the PR war to Hamas and marches on in its... this will be the issue of the day in terms of how people phrase their discussion of what happened. And the battle will be between, well, we'll take Israel's word for it, the Israeli government's word for it, the IDF's word for it, that this was unintentional, but with like precision guided bombs and stuff, I don't know how you get away with unintentional. They've really, I don't know, man. This is so fraught. You know what I'm talking about already, I'm sure. Workers for the World Central Kitchen, Chef Jose Andres' world-renowned humanitarian relief organization, who have been in every disaster area. I don't know what their experience with war zones is necessarily, but, well, they don't seem to worry that much about putting themselves in harm's way to make efforts at direct aid, bringing food to people who need it immediately. And not only just bringing food, they don't just drop rice on you. They cook the food and make it possible for people to eat a warm meal in the middle of a disaster. And they've gone to Gaza. And, that's risky, but that's what they do. And I guess the whole gambit was, look, we're a world-renowned and beloved worldwide organization, and we're going to clearly mark our people and our vehicles, etc. The reports I've been able to skim about this are that they even coordinated their movements with the IDF, reporting what their vehicles looked like, identifying themselves, telling them what the schedules, where they were going, etc., etc. And their 3-vehicle convoy was destroyed by a drone strike. And I think they list 7 World Central Kitchen workers as killed. And I know sometimes there's gray zone about it, like are they the international workers who come to coordinate the effort? Are they local people that they've hired on to help with the effort? Some of both, but mostly the international organizational workers, apparently. They are of American national, an Australian, Polish, from everywhere. And I think 1 or 2 local Palestinians among their number. So it's not even as though it were primary. I mean, not that would help at all, but it's not even as though it were like a large number of Palestinians are moving, and there are some World Central Kitchen people among them. And even though you should never have been anywhere near that with an ammunition strike, they go and, well, Palestinians were... No, that isn't available to them either. And, there's not a lot of people buying the unintentional nature of it. Although I will say, one of the other stories I read yesterday, which is an old story, but I guess it's renewed because, video and audio have become available. Another outrageous police shooting, but this one from actually a couple of years ago, and I should find it. I didn't put it aside because I didn't think we'd be spending any time on it, but I'm just reminded of it because of this ridiculous situation in Gaza. and trying to label it as best we can. Well, as best I can. I'm not great at this one. Anyway, I'm thinking of this police shooting only because, it was a ridiculous scene. It was I'll have to dig it up, a kidnapping. Father had kidnapped his 15-year-old daughter, I think assaulted or possibly even murdered the mother who had custody, has kidnapped this girl. There's a police chase. He crashes the car. The police surround the car. They issue instructions to, driver, you get out and put your hands up. And I don't think he was doing it. I don't know whether he was killed in the crash or whether they shot him or what. But the daughter escapes out the other door. And in the video and audio, you can hear the police know exactly who she is. And they give her instructions and wave her towards the police. Come to us. And I haven't seen the video, but I think they may even have had her crawl on her hands and knees. Because you know how cops are with when they fear for their lives, right? So she's instructed to make her way cautiously toward them. And then they just start shooting, and then there's a voice. I've only read descriptions of it. The voice comes on the audio. Stop shooting. This is the daughter. What are you doing? And the shooting kind of stops, and then starts again. And they killed her. They had, rescued her from a kidnapping, only to shoot her to death as she's crawling towards them on their instructions. And I bring that up only because, as I don't know what to say. As often as we point to police killings and say, that's clearly got to be an intention, that's just an intentional murder, particularly when it's, I don't know, I guess particularly when it's racially tinged, as they say in the newspapers. And I don't know what the races of the people involved here were, but this one, still seems like, well, does anybody think that it was intentional, right? Do we say this as many times as we think that the killings by police in this country were intentional? Do we point at this one and say, well, there's just no way to come to any other conclusion. They knew who she was. They shot her anyway. One of the police shouts out who she is, and they stop, and then they restart again anyway. So, all the evidence, in the same way that we look at the evidence such as it has developed in less than 24 hours from this attack in Gaza, and say, how do we come to any other conclusion but that this is intentional, that they were killing World Central Kitchen workers so that they wouldn't be able to deliver aid in Gaza? That comes very easily. A lot of people are saying this, as Donald Trump would say about it. And if you hold on to some small bit of, I don't know what, either, well, let's wait and see, or let's think of the best possible explanation, it's still impossible. You've seen the pictures. It doesn't really matter what they were wearing. They were wearing protective gear and that were identified with World Central Kitchen patches. But in a car, you can't see that. But on the roof of the car, and why on the roof of the car? Because they know they're being watched by drones, armed drones from above. And the roof of the car says World Central Kitchen. Somehow, I guess the official explanation is, well, we thought a Hamas operative had joined them. Which really, yeah. And then who else is in the car? And that used to be, under normal operating circumstances, we all thought, for Israel, that used to be occasion for them to say, all right, follow it, watch with the drone, be ready at any time, because we don't want to kill all the other people. We just want to get that Hamas guy. And now, of course, in an open state of war, they just say, well, anywhere there's a Hamas person, even if there's not a Hamas person, we'll just blow it up. We thought there was. So, it's going to be very difficult for anybody to accept any kind of explanation. I only bring up the police shooting only because there's still going to be plenty of people who are very skeptical of the police. Very skeptical, if not among them. They're certainly not among the most skeptical. But people who say, I'll even say it's not that crazy occasionally to say we ought to maybe talk about the way we fund the police. If not completely, right? So middle of the roaders are still going to look at this thing, still look at the police shooting, certainly, and say, it's crazy, but I can't bring myself to say that this was intentional. It's just a horrific mistake by very stupid people, and it's intentional that we gave them guns and told them that they could be cops. But it's very hard to believe that they were, can you really sit there and say, these cops got the call to rescue a kidnapped girl and said, why don't we go kill the girl instead? Does anybody really think that's what happened? I mean, I'm sure there are some people who actually would say, yes, I do believe that. I would have a hard time with that one. Then you say, does anybody believe that they intentionally said, let's definitely kill these world-renowned, world-beloved humanitarian aid workers who go everywhere and help everyone? Well, that one's a little easier to believe, as it turns out. But it's still hard. It's very difficult to believe that anybody would say, yes, do this. They may have convinced themselves that there were some weird extenuating circumstances, but that shouldn't matter, and that's just a indication of your brain worms, and you need to be gone. But, all right, that's out there. I don't know how to deal with this one exactly. I also am cautious and worried about saying, well, this is it. This was the straw that will break the camel's back because, well, one, because it's probably inappropriate to be talking about this in terms of camels, for one thing. But for another, gallows humor. It's difficult to point to this and say, well, now you've killed some white Western people. Now you've done it. But that's going to happen in the PR war. That's going to make a difference. So there you have it. In the meantime, thousands and thousands of Gazans killed in this ongoing war, and okay, if the trigger is a couple of Western people, take the trigger, I guess, whatever it takes, I guess, at this point. And then, of course, I also read this morning that the MAGA thinkers are of the opinion that if Donald Trump, which he has now, Donald Trump has made some sort of comment on Gaza saying, well, we want an immediate end to the war, which this is the thing. MAGA types now saying, see, Donald Trump is Donald the Dove, just like in 2016. He's to the left of Biden on the Gaza war. But good reminders from all the people who are watching this closely that what he means is, I would like to see all of the Gazans killed already, and then we could be over with this war. But, does that, it's certainly, they're two unrelated items, I guess I would say. They're both about Gaza, and they've happened in close proximity to one another, but it's not meant to be the case that, well, it's forgivable somehow about this World Central Kitchen thing because Trump has said something even worse or intends to do something even worse. He might, but that's neither here nor there. He was always intending to do worse. You can look at that all by itself and in isolation. And this was one of those this is about the equivalent of blowing up UN trucks. I mean, you just can't do that. And they've done that too, by the way. So, I don't know what to tell you. They're really walking into it with their eyes wide open. So, anyway, I guess that brings us back to the mounting protests in Israel about getting rid of Netanyahu. More power to them. I hope that makes a difference. I'm not entirely sure. Well, you can't tell until you make this change and see whether a different Israeli government approaches things differently. That'll be the last test for that excuse, I guess. All right. There's much else to discuss, of course, but I really kind of felt like, well, you got to bring that one up. You got to have that discussion. That's occupying a lot of minds, and I really haven't. You can't skip over it. As difficult as it is for me, easy as it is for some of you, difficult for me. All right, there are a couple of other items that I wanted to bring to your attention, and one of them was that the fascist guy has posted his bond, that $175 million bond, the reduced amount necessary to appeal the, Oh, yes, the civil fraud case administered by Judge Engeron. And as you'll recall, the bond was reduced from about $450 some odd million down to $175 million. I guess we'll say this. I should be more cautious about it. There was a report that the bond requirements had been met and that the bond had been posted. I don't know that that's true. Reputable news outlets have said it's true, but, my usual caution. Trump and paperwork, man. This is paperwork. I don't know, but I should also make clear, and I think you probably all know, he didn't post the bond. That's important to know, too. Forbes magazine was the source to which everyone was pointing on social media. Oh, and I need to make notes to myself about giving you the story about that police shooting, because it's going to be a little more difficult to dig up because it's about 2 years old. But like I said, it was back in the news because of the release of video and audio. So Forbes has this Trump posts $175 million bond thanks to billionaire Don Hankey. That's what apparently his name is. I don't know whether he pronounces it weird or anything. Never heard of Don Hankey, but you probably haven't either. And so there. Well, no, that's not what I meant to say. What I meant to say was the subheader, I think, tells us a little bit about who he is. So it wasn't Don Hankey personally. It was a company backed by the California tycoon, that's Don Hankey, who made his fortune on high-interest car loans. And he comes to, or the company comes to Trump's rescue. High-interest car loans, that's sometimes referred to as the subprime car loans. In other words, essentially to people with poor credit or low income, and they charge an arm and a leg, and they take advantage of them because they need cars to get to work, and they give them extremely high interest and onerous terms on their loans, and sometimes it's planned to fail from the beginning so that they can repossess the car and sell it to somebody else, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very shady business. I was going to say one step up from, but I don't know. Maybe it's one step down from payday loans, but you know how these billionaires are. Anyway, the real point is that the headline says Trump posts bond, but Trump didn't post bond. Other guy posted bond because Trump can't post bond. That's the story that you really should be taking away from this. Zach Everson wrote this for Forbes, and why don't we read a little bit of it? Doesn't look to be that long. Maybe it'll bring us up to the break. Donald Trump posted, no he didn't, a $175 million bond on Monday in his New York State civil trial. The news comes just 1 week after an appeals court ruled that the former president would not have to immediately post a bond for more than $454 million in the civil fraud case against him and his company. According to the ruling, Trump could delay payment of the full bond while he appeals the ruling as long as he posted a $175 million bond within 10 days. And we were at about 7 or 8, and I don't know whether it didn't say in the order how they were counting the days, whether it was going to be business days or just regular calendar days. But I think as I mentioned, the ruling was, Monday, and he had 10 days. So there's still time. But it's interesting. This whole thing is kind of interesting. I guess you can forgive the construction of it. Donald Trump posted a $175 million bond. I guess he did, but it was backed by someone else's money. But I don't even know if it's really the proper construction to say Donald Trump posted the bond. This other dude, Hankey, what's his first name? Don. Okay, so they're both Dons. Don Hankey, Mr. Hankey from, someone pointed out, Mr. Hankey from South Park, appropriately enough, is posting this bond. It was provided by California-based company Knight, K-N-I-G-H-T, Knight Specialty Insurance Company. Trump's collateral to secure the loans was a combination of cash and investment-grade bonds, according to Don Hankey, the chairman of Knight Insurance, as well as this car salesman. He does, I guess, both things. Hankey told Forbes that his company had initiated the deal, reaching out to Trump just a few days before an appeals court lowered the amount. Just a few days before an appeals court. Okay. Lowered the amount. So he was trying to contact Trump when his bond was still $454 million. That's interesting. Well, anyway, just a few days before an appeals court lowered the amount Trump would have to pay while his appeal was heard. This is what we do at Knight Insurance, said Hankey, who confirmed that he had supported Trump's political campaigns in the past. I'd never met Donald Trump. I'd never talked to him on the phone. I heard he needed a loan or a bond, and this is what we do. So we reached out, and he responded. The deal, Hankey said, came together in just a few days. So, you know, that may or may not really be what Knight Insurance normally does, but it's close enough to their ordinary mission. He may also have this car business that supplements his income and makes him a billionaire. The important takeaway for me on this one was, one, this isn't Donald Trump's money. Trump says he's a billionaire, but still couldn't come up with even the lower amount. But that was also because he's on the hook for about $100 million in the E. Jean Carroll case and paying through the nose for representation in all these other cases. But second, I thought of interest was this didn't happen because Trump reached out to his extensive network and found somebody that he knew and talked him into it. This is somebody else who, you know, decided he was a big enough Trump fan and had enough money that he would offer it up. I don't know Donald Trump. I'm just going to come out of the woodwork and help him. And it may be that Trump was counting on that happening from the very beginning. But to me, it's very telling, one, that Trump didn't come up with the money himself, and two, that he didn't go to Hankey and arrange the thing because he makes great deals. Somebody else just stepped in and bailed him out. In reaching out to his network and thinking about who could he get that much money from, he found he knew no one and no one would help him. And that's pretty amazing. I mean, he found help in the end, but still.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue on. I was reading through the Forbes magazine report on the allegation, anyway, that someone has stepped in and posted the $175 million bond that Trump needed in order to proceed with his appeal in the civil fraud case in New York. So, Mr. Hankey, it's and I saw the post just a minute ago, so I can credit Todus, Todus. I don't know whether I'm pronouncing that correctly or not, but Todus on Blue Sky, who pointed out, oh yeah, right, how come that name rang a bell? Right, Mr. Hankey from, which, in case you don't know, Mr. Hankey in South Park, I recommend you look it up. He's, you gotta know where South Park is coming from in order to make any, sense, if there is any sense to be made out of the Mr. Hankey character. I recommend you look it up. I could tell you straight up, but you wouldn't believe it. So, okay, go ahead and take a look. So over in reality, the other Mr. Hankey, who is a billionaire who stole all his money from desperate people looking to buy cars, has also owns an insurance company and put up this bond. And I find it to be of interest that it wasn't a deal that Donald Trump went out and structured because he's incapable of doing that. Somebody came randomly to his rescue, which I suppose he would then point to and say, that's because the people love me because of the things I say and the things I do. That's all part of my network. They did this because they love me. And, he's got a point in that sense. But I just sort of thought that Mr. Business Executive, Mr. President of the United States would be able to get on the phone with somebody and make it happen. And what it really takes is somebody coming to his rescue and babysitting him. And it's kind of an important distinction. So, Hankey, a billionaire who presides over an auto services empire, and I wonder whether the Knight Insurance Company chiefly is in the business of providing insurance for the people to whom he sells cars at exorbitant prices. But he presides over an auto services empire, may never have met Trump, but he was the largest individual owner of Axos, not Axios, Axos Financial, the lender that bailed out Trump by refinancing his mortgages at Trump Tower and his Miami resort in 2022. So that's of some interest, I think. Axos had previously done business with the family of Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, and saying that name over and over again, I'm reminded, didn't Greg Dworkin mention them not that long ago in connection with something, but I think something else? But I'm not certain. We'll have to ask him if he remembers that. But I'll never remember to ask him that. But okay. Anyway, a spokesperson for Trump did not immediately respond to a request for comment, so they have nothing. The fact that Trump has come up with the money, which he didn't, means he'll be able to protect his assets from New York's Attorney General Letitia James, who had warned that she would start seizing properties as early as late March. Well, and by the way, just in an abundance of caution to the Attorney General's office, I would say stay on that path until you see the paperwork and are sure that it's all done correctly. I'm not positive. It did involve Donald Trump. It could be screwed up. It could have been taken care of properly by Mr. Hankey over here, but check it. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, in February, Judge Arthur Engoron had ruled that Trump had fraudulently misstated the value of his company's assets on financial statements and ordered him to pay $354.9 million as part of the civil fraud case, plus a 9% interest rate that Engoron ruled started accruing on the fines in March of 2019. So, just in case you were wondering, how did that much interest accrue so fast? Well, it's retroactive to March of 2019, as it turns out. So, there you go. It's a thing to keep an eye on. And there are plenty more where that came from. So, okay, that's out there. What about the other, one of the other court cases in which the former guy, the fascist guy, is involved and is creating problems? Aswan Subsang at Rolling Stone has covered the latest in the gag order fiasco. Which gag order fiasco? This time, the gag order fiasco in the Manhattan District Attorney managed case about the Stormy Daniels bribe and cover-up. Got it? Judge Juan Merchan presiding in this one, and here's how Rolling Stone has covered it. Will Trump be punished for attacking Judge's daughter? He doesn't think so, and not a lot of people really do, to be honest. Some of Donald Trump's personal lawyers have been urging him to show a dose of restraint in the courtroom when his hush money trial finally begins in New York City, but ahead of the historic criminal trial scheduled to start in 2 weeks. The former president has relentlessly attacked the judge and his daughter. The judge he's allowed to attack under the terms of the gag order, but what about the daughter? Judge Juan Merchan, who is overseeing Trump's criminal trial, last week imposed a gag order barring Trump from making any public comments about the court's staff and their family members. Trump quickly tested out this order by publicly slamming Merchan and his daughter online. District Attorney Alvin Bragg has requested that Merchan clarify whether the gag order applies to Trump attacks against his daughter or to expand the measure in order to protect this court and the court's family from harm. According to two people who have recently spoken to Trump about the upcoming criminal trial, one of the reasons the presumptive 2024 Republican presidential nominee is convinced he can get away with attacking Merchan's daughter without punishment is because, as he's privately boasted, he has tested judges and prosecutors on gag orders before without any serious repercussions. Well, what do you know? This included a time late last year when Judge Arthur Engoron threatened Trump with a possible night in jail for his behavior during his New York civil fraud trial every time Trump has gotten away with it. So far, judges have not moved to rein in or punish Trump the way they would with virtually any other U.S. citizen, had they behaved in the same manner that the ex-president has. So now, the former and perhaps future president seems emboldened to bring that aggressive, taunting approach to his history-making criminal trial. A criminal trial is different than a civil one, so this could turn out differently, one of the sources tells Rolling Stone. But from talking to Trump about this, you can tell he thinks these guys have tried to be tough guys, tried to rattle him, and then it was all talk. He's said this time it's the same. He has to show he's not afraid of these people. Simple as that. That's something. Reached for comment on this story, Trump's spokesman Stephen Chung says, without elaborating, these sources don't know what the F they're talking about. You can say that. By the way, that would be major scandal should a Biden spokesperson drop the F-bomb. Oh, my God. And, this is just water under the bridge here. Trump's attorneys did not immediately respond to requests for comment on Monday. The New York criminal case revolves around payments, including to porn star Stormy Daniels, that prosecutors allege Trump ordered to be paid to suppress potentially embarrassing news stories in order to boost his 2016 presidential campaign. Ahead of the Manhattan trial, even some of Trump's defenders have cautioned him to tone it down, if only in court, if the former leader of the free world can't help himself online. The Trump team ought to assume that there's going to be a criminal conviction. Celebrity lawyer Alan Dershowitz, who was on Trump's legal defense team for his first impeachment, told Rolling Stone last month. Focus on the appeal, not the trial. I think Trump is right to consider these cases political, and he's right to respond to these cases publicly by saying they're political, but he shouldn't give the other side any hook to hang their hats on by engaging in histrionics inside the courtroom, whether on the stand or seated at his table with his attorneys. But as you know, Trump is a demented idiot and can't help himself and does, in fact, spend his time in the courtroom stage muttering to the jury, though technically, I guess he said, I'm just talking to myself, but doing it loud enough so that the jury can hear it. And it's the sort of thing that they should, tie a gag around your mouth, duct tape it shut if it was anybody else, or they'd kick him out. Anyway, with the trial set to kick off April 15th, Trump is about to find out just how much he'll be able to get away with, whatever he wants, as the Manhattan District Attorney seeks to make him a convicted felon in the middle of an election year. Trump has quickly tested the outer boundaries of gag orders imposed by Judge Merchan by publicly assailing his daughter. Within the past week, Trump has, on 4 separate occasions, attacked the daughter, a Democratic consultant. In one instance, Trump claimed she had used an image of the former president behind bars in her social media profile picture, asserting that the photo meant it was, quote, completely impossible for me to get a fair trial, and calling on the judge to recuse himself. It turns out that the social media account no longer belongs to Merchan's daughter, and the image was apparently a hoax. Oh well. Trump and his team have further tried to argue that the daughter's consulting work is also grounds for Merchan's recusal from the case. She has served as an executive at Authentic Campaigns, a digital advertising firm that works with California Democratic Representative Adam Schiff's Senate campaign, as well as Senate Democrats' primary super PAC, Senate Majority PAC. And I think I saw that the claim was, I think via the New York Post, that they're raising money off of this trial, and that's the real problem. Not just that she's a Democratic consultant, but that the judge's daughter is professionally, directly benefiting from publicizing the trial, and they're raising money off of the Trump trial. But what's actually happening is she works for a consulting company, and one or two of the clients of the consulting company are raising money off of the fact that Trump is on trial. But all Democrats are probably able to raise money off of the fact that Trump is on trial. And that they were going with the headline that she's made $93 million, or she's raised $93 million for these people in the last week, or whatever the hell, period of time they were complaining about, just because of capitalizing off of the trial. But when you're talking about the Senate Majority PAC and Schiff's Senate campaign and several large campaigns and large PACs, and then totaling up all the money that they've collected in a certain period of time, and then saying, oh, we attribute that all to, one, Trump's trial, and two, Merchan's daughter having something to do with the consultants who are working with the candidate. Nobody knows anything about that. Nobody knows anything about that. If you get a piece of direct mail from a PAC or a candidate, you'll have no idea who the consultant was who helped write it. That's just never an issue. But they're looking for any link they can. Over the weekend, Trump posted a link to the New York Post story, that's the one I was talking about the daughter's consulting firm having worked for these committees. The piece states that the daughter's clients had, quote, used the case in their solicitation emails, asserting this raises concerns that Merchan has a conflict of interest, a major conflict of interest, Trump would say. This is a disgrace to our legal system, Trump wrote. Judge Merchan should be immediately sanctioned and recused. Not that he should recuse himself, but he should be kicked off. And this fake case, only kept alive by the highly conflicted judge, should be completely dismissed right away. Okay, sure. Trump's campaign spokesperson, Stephen Chung, told the Post that the judge's daughter is actively making money from this sham attack against President Trump, rendering Judge Merchan conflicted out. No. The Post further reported that Trump's attorneys are considering filing another motion demanding Manhattan Supreme Court Justice Juan Merchan recuse himself from the trial, set to begin on April 15th. And I believe they did file that, and it was flushed down the toilet immediately by the judge, who just basically says, you're just flinging a bunch of things out there and saying, these are established facts. Like, there's no judge's daughter making money from the attack. She's making money because she's works for a company, and the company does political consulting, and political candidates that they work for are saying, hey, by the way, have you noticed that the head of the other party that we're running against is on trial for all sorts of criminal violations? That's kind of a different thing. And by the way, for a free speech absolutist who hung his whole case against this restraining order, and indeed against the criminal case even coming up, and his argument for dismissal of all the cases against him is he needs to be allowed to exercise his First Amendment rights and say anything he wants. As usual, rights for him and nobody else, as they say. Okay, except they say it with me and thee, which makes it that much cuter. On Monday, Bragg reiterated his request last week to expand the gag order to expressly cover Merchan's daughter, with his lawyers writing in a new filing, there is no constitutional right to target the family of this court, let alone on the blatant falsehoods that have served as the flimsiest pretext for defendants' attacks. Trump's lawyers pushed back against the move from Bragg, arguing that Trump has the right to comment on Merchan's daughter because the judge hasn't recused himself. Former President Trump's comments concerning Merchan's daughter are properly understood, a criticism of the court's prior decision not to recuse itself, you see. That's what his lawyers wrote in a filing, arguing there's effectively no difference between criticism of the court and the judge's daughter because the attacks relate to a member of the court's immediate family having a financial interest in all the ongoing attacks on Trump, including this case by virtue of her senior role at Authentic. And while that makes sense in fantasy land, what the judge was saying is, see, all the connective tissue that you assume people will just understand in your fashion, doesn't hold together. Most people see things completely opposite from what you're saying. The lawyers further indicated that they plan to request permission to formally demand Merchan's recusal, writing that Trump is simultaneously submitting a pre-motion letter seeking leave to file a recusal motion based on changed circumstances and newly discovered evidence. Well, we'll see how far that goes. And, in all likelihood, Merchan will say, well, if there's any chance that I might be found in the wrong here, I don't want to also compound the error by having thrown him in jail. But then I would say, hey, there's protections built in. There's appeals from all that. If you think you might possibly be wrong in enforcing the gag order by throwing Trump in jail, well, he'll appeal regardless. And there's a whole system set up to make sure that he's not unfairly jailed. And if the appeals court steps in and sets him free, okay. But in the meantime, let him do that appealing from jail. That's another suggested approach to all of this. All right, let's see. There are a couple of other items in the news, as you may imagine, and trying to decide which ones we hit first. But it occurs to me, maybe we'll read some of these to sort of set up some discussion with Joan, who we expect in the last segment. But I saw something, I saw that she has written on the same topic. And let's see, her piece is from yesterday, 3:45 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, in case you were wondering. And the piece I'm looking at is, the piece I'm looking at is a New York Times piece also from yesterday. Does it say what time it was published? Sometimes those things happen, but no, it doesn't. But I wonder if, is Joan referring at all to, I can't, not that I see in her piece, so I don't know which one predated what, but I'm also looking at the New York Times Paul Krugman article asking a question, but I think rhetorically, that I asked myself, although we didn't really get to it on the air, I don't think, but around the house we were discussing this, when President Biden, in reaction to I still don't have a term for it beyond saying the bridge collapse in Baltimore, but the bridge bashing, I don't know. We need some kind of agreed upon term for when a gigantic container ship runs into a bridge and the bridge has no hope of surviving, but so as not to imply that there was anything wrong with the bridge. But when he responded to that incident by saying the federal government, he pledged that the federal government would pay the costs of fixing the situation, getting all the wreckage out of the water and rebuilding this bridge and getting the port of Baltimore operational again. Within reason, I think, for a functioning federal government to be able to do. However, my immediate thought was, now that he's done that, there will be Republicans dedicated to not doing it. And of course, they were going to be a problem anyway, as they immediately tried to blame the whole situation on some political construct that they could come up with. As you heard them say, DEI, somehow. Somebody's DEI, I don't know. The boat, the bridge, the water. King Neptune is using DEI, and the mermaids are causing problems. I don't know the fish, the molecules, no idea. But somehow this was going to be DEI's fault, and that should be the signal that you should expect Republicans, in the face of this, and again, all of normie America will be behind fixing the damn port and having the federal government do it too. But MAGA America will be blocking this for sure. And if for no other reason than if Biden can pledge the assistance of the federal government to a major disaster and deliver it and fix the thing, that will make them look like idiots because they've never been able to do that for anything. And in fact, they oppose it every time someone says they're going to do it, and they'll oppose it this time too. So with some surprise, I see that Krugman's headline is in question form. Will MAGA Republicans block Baltimore's rebuilding? And it's probably a rhetorical question, even for Krugman. And it's also probably worth pointing out that there is some question in there. Like, there's a difference between will MAGA Republicans be able to block Baltimore's rebuilding? Will they try? Absolutely. Will they succeed? That is an open question. But I wanted to throw out, before I even read Krugman's article, which probably, I assume he goes through the exercise and says, yeah, they're going to try and do that. Absolutely. They're probably already trying to do it. And the answer, the response here will be Joan's piece from yesterday. Gops fights over key bridge repairs as House Speaker remains silent. They can't figure out what to do, I guess. And, there's probably a fight going on between some Republicans, MAGA Republicans on the one hand, who say, DEI, we can't spend a dime, we should make them do it, and I'm not even, maybe we should just leave the port blocked forever because Chinese communists are probably using it. So there's probably some division there between those guys and the mainstream Republicans who say, Chinese communists are using the port, we can't have it, and we shouldn't spend a dime because something federal deficit. That's the difference between the two groups, of course. And it's so huge. Anyway, first we'll start with Paul Krugman, and then maybe we'll follow up and take a look at what Joan has to say, because then it'll be almost time to just ask Joan what she has to say. So, all right, we'll find out if the question is rhetorical from Krugman by reading through his piece. Why not? Soon after, a huge container ship struck Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge, bringing it down. That's one way of putting it. I think that's clear. President Biden pledged that the federal government would, quote, pay the entire cost of reconstructing, unquote, the bridge. Okay, this would clearly be the right thing to do, not just to help the state of Maryland, but also to limit the economic damage from a disaster that has blocked both a major road artery and a major port. Among other things, the Port of Baltimore plays a key role in both exports of coal. Anybody interested in that? Anybody who's normally a problem getting on board with Democrats who might be interested in coal? In general, yes, maybe. But then the next question for Manchin is, does he have personal stakes in any coal that is exported? And if not, and I think the bulk of his fortunes are tied up in the extremely dirty coal that's burned locally, not exported. So screw the hell out of the rest of you. I don't care. I don't know. We'll see. But exports in coal and trade in farm and construction equipment. So the bridge disaster will have direct adverse effects on the heartland as well as the East Coast. But let me just stop for a second and point out that the other party is as dedicated to ruining the lives of people who ostensibly support them as they are to ruining the lives of those who actively oppose them, if they think they can get those people to cheer for it anyway. And to a great extent, they have been successful in doing so. And back to Krugman, if America were still the same country that enacted the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, passed with overwhelming bipartisan support, of course, back then in Congress and signed into law by a Republican president, which, by the way, let me just also point out that back in 1956, et cetera, overwhelming bipartisan support would have been necessary if Republicans were the same sort of people in the Senate then that they were today. The filibuster at that point required 67 votes to invoke cloture. But, of course, that was from the time when people approached legislation from the perspective of, well, let's put it up for a vote. And if you have more votes than we do, you get to do what you want to do. But then that stopped at some point in the late 1990s to early 2000s. Anywho, right. Well, we're not the same country that enacted the Federal Highway Act of 1956, though it did pass overwhelmingly and gave rise to our interstate system. There would soon be little question that Congress, or if we were the same country, there would be little question that Congress would approve funding soon after it returns from Easter recess, which it's still on, I'll point out. So, it's been a couple of days, and Baltimore is probably like, yeah, so is there going to be any activity on this front or what? Because we wanted to get started on this work already, but they're not coming back until the beginning of next week. In fact, they're not even going to deliver their fake impeachment papers to the Senate until next week. That's all, this bridge isn't the only thing they've set aside for the Easter recess. But we aren't that country anymore, Krugman helpfully reminds us. Biden will probably be able to get funds for rebuilding, but it's by no means a sure thing. The rise of MAGA Republicans is only part of the problem. I've seen several people citing the response to the 2007 collapse of the Interstate 35 bridge in Minnesota as an example of what things were like in a better political era. Indeed, within days, Congress voted unanimously to provide $250 million in aid. And as I recall, that 2007 bridge collapse, was that just like fatigue of the bridge, or did something happen on that one? I can't remember whether that was, maybe there was who knows? It shouldn't matter, because of course everybody came together and said, yeah, Interstate 35 has to be repaired. Anyway, he points out that was a one-off. The Minnesota bridge collapse highlighted the decaying state of America's infrastructure, and one might have expected the disaster to lead to real action, but it didn't. President Barack Obama pleaded with Congress to approve broad increases in infrastructure spending, but was able to sign a highway funding bill in 2015. But for the most part, he was stymied by Gop opposition that whole time. It's 7-8 years. The entirety of his term. This was, of course, before he became president. The bridge collapsed in 2007, in the middle of the campaign. Tim Pawlenty was like trying to capitalize on that, as I could recall. But anyway, it took him the entirety of his term to get a chance to sign an infrastructure bill that would address the general state of American roadway infrastructure, and Republicans resisted the whole way. As President Donald Trump repeatedly promised to revamp as president, he promised to revamp America's infrastructure. Its Infrastructure Week became a running joke, but of course, he never delivered in any of that. Major action on infrastructure didn't happen until late 2021, when sleepy Joe Biden, I guess, somehow managed to get the whole thing done, even despite not having control of Congress in 2021, I guess. But not for very long. I don't even remember now what the situation was, only that it was a miracle that it got through. Anyway, that with the enactment of the bipartisan infrastructure law, which, despite the name, received only 13 Republican votes in the House. And that'll color your perception of it a lot more than whether or not they happen to actually have the majority then. And I think they did not. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue on with Paul Krugman's look at whether or not, the rhetorical question of whether or not MAGA will block repairs of the bridge and port in Baltimore. So he was pointing out how much difficulty there was in getting any infrastructure investment made. Even post-bridge collapse last time in 2007, it took 8 years to get an infrastructure bill passed, and even then, not nearly what was necessary. And then, of course, major action on infrastructure didn't happen until late 2021 with the enactment of the bipartisan infrastructure law, which, despite the name, received only 13 Republican votes in the House, which was, in fact, in Democratic hands at the time, which is how it was even possible while Biden was president. And that was with Democrats in full control of Congress. The next sentence says, it's not foolish to worry that MAGA hardliners will block aid to Maryland in much the same way they've blocked aid to Ukraine. But again, MAGA is only part of the problem. Let's talk for a minute, you have 1 minute, sir, about why it took 14 years after the Minnesota bridge collapse for us finally to take major action on infrastructure. Extreme partisanship, which took hold long before Trump took control of the GOP, is part of the answer. It was clear through most of the Obama years that Republicans wanted to prevent good things from happening on a Democratic president's watch. It was explicitly a goal of the Republican Party at the time, as a matter of fact. Under Obama, GOP legislators squeezed federal spending after they took control of the House, supposedly because they were worried about government debt, only to open up the taps once Trump took office. There was also an element of reflexive opposition to government spending in general, no matter how obvious the need. Mitch McConnell, as Senate Majority Leader, didn't do much to oppose Trump, but he did put the brakes on infrastructure spending. Finally, to the extent that Trump had anything like an infrastructure plan, it was very, well, Trumpian. Even before he took office, I predicted, Paul Krugman says, that he wouldn't actually do much to build infrastructure because he and his associates clearly weren't interested in producing a clean plan for government investment. Instead, they were floating a roundabout scheme involving tax credits that wouldn't have generated significant new investment, but probably would have offered huge opportunities for cronyism and corruption. The history here is reason enough to worry about rebuilding in Baltimore, even if the bridge collapse hadn't been caught up in culture war politics. But of course, it has. MAGA politicians and media figures wasted no time, except all of the time that they spend is a waste, but you get an idea. We wasted no time after the bridge collapse trying to cast blame on the usual suspects, including funds meant to be spent on green energy and, in particular, diversity initiatives. In the immediate wake, and by the way, green energy thing, yeah, there were, I guess some people didn't get the DEI memo soon enough, and their knee-jerk reaction was, this is all because of the Green New Deal. I think Nancy Mace tried that one, and that was even more difficult to connect. I mean, believe it or not, the DEI one was the less difficult to figure out the actual connection. But anyway. In the immediate wake of the Key Bridge collapse, a Republican state legislator from Utah replied on a post on Twitter disparaging a member of the Maryland Port Commission. How do you even know who these people are, right? Writing, this is what happens when you have governors who prioritize diversity over well-being, and security of citizens. Oh, I see. A Republican former state legislator from Florida posted a video clip of the Key Bridge collapsing with the caption, DEI did this. I mean, why not? Just declare it. Baltimore's Mayor Brandon Scott has been a special target on Twitter. The site, well, they say X. I ignore that whole thing. Forget it. On Twitter, for no apparent reason other than the fact that he's black. As the New Republic's Greg Sargent points out, some of the MAGA reaction to the bridge collapse is reminiscent of Trump's behavior during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, when he whined about bailouts for states that didn't support him politically. So, will partisanship and conspiracy theorizing get in the way of rebuilding the Key Bridge? I'd like to dismiss that risk, but not that long ago, if you had asked me, I would have expected Republicans I wouldn't have expected stonewalling of aid to Ukraine either. So this is no time to be complacent. So he doesn't really answer the question, but I think the hint is that the question is rhetorical in nature, and indeed, as Joan writes, they're already obstructing. Let's see. The body of her story, again titled Gops Fights Over Key Bridge Repairs as House Speaker Remains Silent, says that the catastrophic collapse of the bridge has dominated headlines for a week. Many prominent voices among the nation's leadership have voiced their support for Maryland in the aftermath. Joe Biden responded immediately with a press conference. Chuck Schumer offered any help needed as Baltimore works to recover. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries vowed to be there for the state of Maryland, but from House Speaker Mike Johnson, crickets. He's busy praying, I guess. No tweets, no press releases, no statements. That might actually be a positive development, given what can usually be in a Republican comment about things like that. But not even the pro forma stuff of, oh my gosh, thoughts and prayers. Didn't even hear that, I guess. That might be because he's still learning what's expected of the person second in line to the presidency, or it might be because he's been too busy having the vapors over the White House Easter celebrations. Maybe it's because the Key Bridge construction has emerged as the latest friction point in the House, with some of the usual Freedom Caucus suspects raising hell about who's going to pay for fixing it. It began hours after the disaster, just hours, when extremists jumped in with their usual conspiracy theories and racism, blaming the bridge collapse on everything from Biden's infrastructure bill and border policies to diversity, equity, and inclusion programs of Maryland Governor Wes Moore and Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott, who are both black men. So it's not hard to fathom why far-right lawmakers don't want the federal government involved in rebuilding the bridge. South Carolina Representative Ralph Norman said that Biden's promise to pay for rebuilding the bridge is absurd and idiotic. His fellow South Carolina Representative Jeff Duncan at least acknowledged that this is a tragedy, but insisted, before we spend one more dime for domestic infrastructure, we must build a domestic border wall. Oh, that's interesting, by the way. Two South Carolinians, I guess, isn't Ralph Norman, is he on the Appropriations Committee? We've heard his name before, so it's entirely likely. Duncan we don't hear very much about. But by the way, South Carolina is constantly begging and pleading for funds to maintain its port at Charleston. And should anything ever happen along those lines in Charleston, you can be sure that they would be demanding that the federal government step in. Let's see. Representative Dan Muser of Pennsylvania said that this was outrageous for Biden to pledge federal dollars. You know, he doesn't refer to it as the American taxpayers' dollars on anything. You know, the first reaction, the only reaction tends to be to spend. Well, it's going to cost money to get that bridge out of the way. So come on. Anyway, oops. White House spokesman Andrew Bates was ready for that one with an embedded tweet pointing out that POTUS knows the federal government has a critical role to play when it comes to American infrastructure, and so does Representative Muser. The top feature on his website is that he just, quote, secured $2.7 million in federal funding to replace the Johnston Street Bridge in his district. How amazing is that? He's so proud of himself for that one. But, of course, it's hypocrisy and it doesn't sink in. Meanwhile, responsible House Republicans like Tom Cole of Oklahoma, the chair of the House Appropriations Committee Subcommittee on Transportation, knows that of course this has to be done. I'm not hostile to that at all, Cole told Fox News, because the operations of this major port affect the national economy. I've learned more about the Port of Baltimore than I knew in the last 48 hours in terms of how important it is. Oh my God, he learns. Whether it's moving automobiles through there, automobiles, yes, automobiles, that's right. Harbor, port, big port, psh, all right, you know how it goes. And moving agricultural, agricultural goods, I guess, both imports and exports in terms of supplies and machinery, Cole said. I'm not going to quibble with the President of the United States over this, and certainly Baltimore has every reason to expect a full and robust federal response. Johnson might be keeping his head in the sand to avoid this brewing fight, preferring to take pot shots at Biden over Easter eggs, but he's not going to be able to avoid it for long. The House returns to work next Tuesday. That's not to say that he actually is going to, do any work, but he returns and the conditions are right for them to do some work. Maybe. Let's talk for a moment about what other sorts of work they might do. There was a very interesting project undertaken via Blue Sky just yesterday as, how shall we identify her? As Marissa Cabas, the writer of thehandbasket.co. That's her newsletter, which is on the service known as, I assume this is being pronounced Beehive, even though it's BEEHIIV, which I think is supposed to be, I think it got set up as a Substack alternative because Substack is suboptimal in terms of like its ownership and their responsibility for, Nazis and whatnot. But Marissa Cabas writes there, fairly popular, I think, on Blue Sky, and, a pretty steady hand in a lot of reporting, has got this bee in her bonnet, and correctly so, about something that we hadn't mentioned on the air so far, I don't think, but over the weekend, or maybe we did. We may have said something about it. I'll read you the way she has phrased things in the story she put together rather than trying to piece it together from her posts on Blue Sky. Her issue is that the Democrats in the House who voted to censure Rashida Tlaib, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, over her Palestine comments, the headline reads, have been largely silent on a Gop representative's call for nukes to be used in Gaza. Yeah, it was rather crazy. Tim Walberg has apparently been caught on video saying, the inappropriate and wrong response, but at least somewhat I don't know, somewhat reasonable in terms of like not calling directly for the murder of millions, had said, well, we shouldn't be spending a dime on humanitarian aid in Gaza. Again, that's supposed to be taken relative to what he says in the rest of the video as reasonable, which it is not by any real stretch of the imagination, by any measure. Okay. Then he goes on to say it should, that is the resolution in Gaza, should be like Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Or is it Hiroshima? I don't know. At any rate, it doesn't matter for these purposes, but moving on. My Japanese, not great. I thought immediately of his Democratic colleague and fellow Michigander, Rashida Tlaib. Get it over quick, the former pastor added with his call to arms. Former pastor saying nuke Gaza. Now he'll say, metaphorically, I meant, or all I meant is for that you should get it over quickly. Yeah, but by getting it over quickly, just like when Trump says that you mean kill everybody, essentially, and then try and blow past it, I guess. Well, anyway, as Marissa writes, as soon as I heard that Tim Walberg was recorded at a town hall last week saying all of this, she thought immediately of Rashida Tlaib. Back in November, 22 House Democrats voted to censure their colleague, Congresswoman Tlaib, for comments that she made on the war in Israel and Palestine. Tlaib, the only Palestinian-American member of Congress, was censured for supposedly, quote, promoting false narratives. That the October 7th Hamas terrorist attack was, I don't know, or promoting false narratives about it. It's not, it needs some editing here, Marissa, but I know you're writing it on the fly. But supposedly for promoting false narratives about the October 7th Hamas terrorist attack and, quote, calling for the destruction of the state of Israel, unquote, by using the phrase, from the river to the sea. And, yeah, we know about that one. And while, there's differing interpretations of it, it's still pretty far from, it's certainly pretty far from, it should be like Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Well, duh. There's a pretty quantum difference there, right? So, the censure, she writes, in my humble opinion, was, as Greg would put it,
that's bullshit.
Yes, and at the time, I emailed my congressman, Representative Dan Goldman, one of the Dems who voted for it, by the way, to say so. The vote to censure, which took place exactly 1 month after the war in Israel/Palestine, as she puts it, began, has continued to stick in my craw, and it's clear that that's the case, especially as the carnage in Gaza rages on with our government's approval. After my thoughts went to Tlaib and how she must have felt hearing one of her colleagues implying the U.S. should nuke her parents' country of origin, where she still has family, I thought about the 22 Democrats. They were so willing to lend the credibility of their office to a bad faith Republican-led attack to demonstrate their unwavering support for Israel, but it came at an enormous cost, the cost of their own party members' mental health and physical safety. I reached out to the spokespeople for all 22 Democrats on Monday morning with a simple inquiry. I wanted to know if they planned to make a statement or take any sort of action, like a censure, against Representative Walberg for his call for the destruction of Gaza. Only 3 offices responded. Now, I'm going to have to parse some of this, but let me get her version out of it first, her full write-up out. Deranged and depraved Democrat Representative Richie Torres of New York said through his press secretary, which was surprising given Torres's aggressive and unapologetic support for Israel. And it's not. I mean, it's not surprising. It is deranged and depraved. That's crazy to say it's so surprising, quite honestly. I got to tell you, I got the sense that Marissa, like most people, and it's perfectly okay to have, has got an agenda in doing this, and it's not even a bad agenda. It's clear, and I think we should be, particularly for for someone writing from her perspective. She's not working at a major news outlet, although very often a lot of the people cheering her on were saying, well, why can't we get this sort of coverage from a major news outlet? Well, you wouldn't get this sort of coverage from a major news outlet for at least two reasons, one of which I'm still holding in my pocket. But the other is that they wouldn't want their reporters taking this on from this angle. Not that it isn't valuable, not that it isn't right or true, but they wouldn't want them to do that. And this is becoming clear, I think, in all of this, in the way she's phrasing everything. So, now, again, she gets the answer from Torres. His comments, Walberg? Walberg's comments are deranged and depraved, which she thought was surprising because he supports Israel. Well, lots of people support Israel, but would say that, nuking Gaza or suggesting that it ought to be done is deranged and depraved. That's not surprising. But she goes on to say she thought it was surprising given Torres' aggressive and unapologetic support for Israel, with a link to, I guess, previous comments that are supposed to support that. He's literally in Israel right now, she notes. I followed up, pointing out Torres' vote to censure Tlaib and asking if he thought Representative Walberg's comments were on the same level. His press secretary said yes. When I pressed further, asking if Torres planned to call for a vote to censure, I received no reply. That's where I have something to say that differs from what her reporting is. But there's more. Let's get through it. Another reply was from Representative Greg Landsman of Ohio's office, who pointed me to his tweets on the matter, which were posted 43 minutes after my initial email to his office. And also said that if the vote were in front of him, he would vote to censure Walberg. None of this helps end the war and get hostages home, he added. And one last reply came in early Tuesday morning from Congressman Brad Schneider of Illinois. He said, in part, and this is the quote that she grabs from it, Congressman Walberg's unfortunate and dangerous remarks neither make us more secure nor move Israel and the Palestinians closer to peace. I do appreciate the congressman walking back his words, I guess he must have, which I appreciate. While I appreciate my colleague's commitment to the U.S.-Israel relationship and to ensuring Israel's safety and security as the only democracy in the Middle East, I reject his cavalier use of the specter of nuclear weapons. This is a critical time to support our ally Israel as it works to rescue its hostages, get aid into Gaza, and ensure that Hamas can never repeat the barbaric acts of October 7th, which is just impossible, and they will, and no amount of bombing likely to undo that. I guess short of what Walberg suggests, which is outrageous, and it would be better simply to take the risk, frankly, of future attacks. Misguided and ill-considered calls for use of nuclear weapons or prohibitions on humanitarian relief are not only dangerous, they are likely to extend the war and put both Israelis and Palestinians as well as Americans at much greater risks. That's the end of the quote. She goes on to say, I've asked if he'd support a vote to censure Walberg, and I'm waiting to hear back. To be clear, I don't see Tlaib and Walberg's comments as at all equivalent. Tlaib was defending her family's homeland, while Walberg was calling for nuclear war. But since the Democrats who voted to censure her disagreed with my assessment, I needed to present them as comparable. I don't know if that's really the case. A spokesperson for Representative Goldman initially replied but did not follow through with a comment. Walberg posted a statement to Twitter Sunday evening, writing that he stood by his comments and that they were misunderstood because the video clip removed the context. So far, he's been given space for understanding and grace, where Tlaib was not. I guess he makes a comment saying, is this his latest on this? I'm not really... Yeah, I guess so. As a child who grew up in the Cold War era, the last thing I'd advocate for would be the use of nuclear weapons, except it was what you did. In a shortened clip, I used a metaphor to convey the need for both Israel and Ukraine to win their wars as swiftly as possible without putting American troops in harm's way. I guess I see that. My reasoning was the exact opposite of what is being reported. The quicker these wars end, the fewer innocent lives will be caught in the crossfire, except for the nuclear part. The sooner Hamas and Russia surrender, the easier it will be to move forward. The use of this metaphor, along with the removal of the context, distorted my message, but I fully stand by these beliefs and stand by our allies. I mean, just to extricate ourselves from this, I guess, let's say it's a sensible thing to say, and assuming that we move on, just so we can get through the rest of this article, even though I would object to that ordinarily. No one deserves to be told what they mean, Representative Cori Bush, a close ally of Tlaib, said in an interview after witnessing their colleagues distort Tlaib's words during the censure vote. At the time, Walberg defended his vote to censure, writing in a statement that he defended her constitutional right to free speech, but believed a video she posted calls for violence. Despite her claim, the phrase "from the river to the sea" is not an aspirational call for peaceful coexistence, especially as it was shown shortly after another slogan, "No peace on stolen land," he continued. While I will continue to defend First Amendment liberties for those I disagree with, I will not support the right to call for violent genocide. Unless when he's doing it. And yet here we are, nearly 5 months later, being asked by Walberg to believe that what he said wasn't a call for violent genocide. Based on the response rate to my inquiry, there appears to be little political will to make him explain himself. It's always telling to see who gets punished and who is given the benefit of the doubt, who is and who isn't seen as a useful political cudgel. Going after Tlaib gave Democrats an opportunity to shore up their pro-Israel bona fides, or bona fides, if you prefer. But what could be gained by demanding the same treatment of Walberg? The answer, it seems, is nothing, and so silence largely reigns. I asked Tlaib's office if she had any response to what Walberg said and if she'd support a vote to censure him. Her spokesperson directed me to comments she made Saturday to the Detroit Free Press, but did not address whether or not she'd vote to censure. God damn her, why, how dare she? Well, interesting. It's disgusting and disgraceful that anyone, let alone a U.S. congressperson, would call for the genocide of Palestinians with nuclear weapons, she told the paper. Representative Walberg is not the first member of Congress to use despicable, violent, dehumanizing language to describe their genocidal intent in Gaza, and will not be the last. This kind of anti-Palestinian and anti-Asian hate must be defeated. Oh, yeah, good point. But it can't possibly be defeated when those who claim to be our fiercest defenders of democracy choose to do nothing. Now, hold on. It may be the case and maybe several of these 22 literally will shock us all, just as we've seen the Israeli government say killing World Central Kitchen people was a total accident somehow. And was it Los Angeles Police Department? I keep assuming that was the case, but maybe it wasn't. But the shooting that I mentioned earlier 2 years ago, but shooting that resulted in an insanely in the death of a supposedly a kidnapping victim that they were seeking to recover. It's crazy to think that these things are intentional, and yet there's very little other explanation for it, and yet in different contexts we may come to different conclusions. And so we have this situation here. So let me stop at this point and point out that, okay, so yesterday's discussion on Blue Sky, as Marissa was putting this reporting together and calling these offices, it became clear what the tenor of this article was going to be. And on procedural grounds alone, I have to point something out. One, the nature of her question, I think correctly, but the nature of her question to these congressional offices changed along the way. Her thoughts went immediately to Tlaib, as she pointed out, and I'm sure that's the case, and said, well, shouldn't Walberg be equally, if not more, deserving of a censure as Tlaib was, which she wasn't. I mean, she didn't deserve that censure. That's really her point. And yet, if she could get a censure for that, why wouldn't Walberg? And it's like with a lot of Israel protest, skipping over the political dynamics, and interestingly, by the way, targeting Democrats for the lack of censure of a Republican member in a Republican majority House of Representatives. The likelihood of getting a censure resolution against a Republican member to the floor in a Republican House is 0. And Democrats will not be the ones who are able to bring that to the floor. Could they try? Could they call for it? Yes, they could. But 2 things happening. 1, she calls their office and says, would you vote for a censure of Tim Walberg? And the answer, ordinarily, pretty simple. I guess she was concerned with how long it was taking people to say, yes, I absolutely would. But it's a difficult question to answer because you know what you're walking into. Because the answer is, yes, I would vote for a censure, but a censure is not going to make it to the floor of the House for me to vote on. Well, would you move to bring it to the floor of the House? Sure, but it's not getting there. Oh, but are you dodging the question now? No, I'm not. I'm telling you how things work. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue on. Let me at least spend a few minutes here on, on wrapping this up since we have the opportunity. And so here's what happened. The opportunity coming rapidly to a close. Although maybe we'll discuss this. All right, I'm glad to have Joan McCarter joining us today. Okay, I was just not. Sometimes something got in the way in the last minute there. But I was just in the middle of discussing something that you might be interested in discussing. But first, let me say hi and welcome back. And how you doing?
Hi.
Okay.
I'm back.
Yes.
Glad to be here.
Okay.
I'm
excellent.
awake.
Yeah. And it takes an effort.
Semi-caffeinated?
Okay. All right. Well, take a caffeine break if necessary. Absolutely. Have that coffee with you or whatever your method of delivery might be. I don't know. Is it intravenous now that you're doing caffeine or?
It's tea.
Tea. Excellent. Wonderful.
And this makes me very sad. Somehow COVID just messed up coffee for me. Coffee doesn't taste good for me.
Wow.
Anymore. And it makes me really sad.
Yeah.
It's one of my great joys in life.
Sure. Oh, I can understand that. But, another of the weird side effects of COVID. I mean, it's we don't understand. We never understood this. We haven't had a chance to understand this disease. But between that and what I learned, West Nile virus makes people not want to eat meat anymore, which might be great for the environment and all. But some people will take great joy in that. And then others will point out, this is horrific that you would take great joy in eating. Okay, but not me. I eat some meat. So anyway, coffee seems harmless, right, for you to be able to enjoy that. Hope you found a tea that's nice.
Yeah.
All right.
Gray works.
Oh, that's a good one. One of my favorites. All right. Well, we'll now everybody send all your favorite tea suggestions. Okay, but
good idea. Yes.
okay, why don't we do that? And there's a whole tea culture, just as there is a whole coffee culture with not only different odd teas but ways of brewing. So maybe you can make a hobby of that.
Well, I'm hoping that this eventually goes away and I can
Okay.
enjoy my brew again.
Sure. Well, we'll hope for that too. If anybody knows of any teas that restore your love for coffee, wouldn't be a great business model, but it would be nice to know about. That's it. Trump tea. The best thing you can say about Trump tea is it puts you back on coffee, no matter how it tastes. Okay. Well, at any rate, I was just in the middle of discussing something that might be of some interest to you because, for a number of reasons. But I was just reading the work of writer Marissa Kabas, who has contacted the offices of the 22 Democrats who voted with Republicans to censure Rashida Tlaib for her comments about Israel and Gaza, and asking, would they be willing, and this is initially a fine question, would they be willing to support a similar censure resolution against Tim Walberg for his comments saying, what the hell, let's nuke Gaza, basically.
Yeah.
Now, he's given an explanation for himself. It's a terrible explanation. You don't mention nuclear weapons in this context. You can't explain it away. Forget it. Just say, yeah, that's not, at best you can say, that's not what I meant. I as dumb as it sounds, I did not mean that, but I really didn't. If you didn't, but he did. But anyway.
He did.
Yes.
He definitely did.
Now, where this becomes a little bit annoying and a little bit frustrating is that, one, it was slow in getting responses, and that bothered her. But it's recess, and it's going to be slow. On the other hand, how slow do you have to be to say, yeah, I think it's terrible that someone would say that you should use nuclear weapons in Gaza? Now, if that's the question, the answer is easy. The second question, would you support a censure resolution, is easy, yes, but also hard if you want to be honest, which is there's not going to be a censure resolution on the floor of the House ever against a Republican for something like this.
No.
Which could then be followed up as she did. Well, would you try and send a message? Could you try? Would you sponsor such a resolution and even to see it fail or never make it to the floor? Now, that's a question where it becomes more understandable. Hey, it's been 40 minutes since I asked. Why am I not getting an answer? Because now you're talking about, can I get this is something that you have to consult with the Democratic leadership about. Even though it's not going to go anywhere, the resolution kind of has to be agreed upon if you're going to try and censure another member. And if you're going to try and make a real stab at getting it to the floor only to allow Republicans to block it, you need the Democratic leader to bring that resolution to the floor in order to get it an immediate vote. So the question is really one to Hakeem Jeffries' office, which you're instead calling every other office about, and then saying, it's been 40 minutes, where's my answer? That's not a realistic expectation.
It is not a realistic
expectation. So I just kind of want to
certainly understand the impetus behind it.
Yeah.
And the anger and...
Absolutely.
And why. But
it's just another one of those examples, to me, of like, well, okay, but, and I hate to divert attention. And yes, honestly, the 22 people who voted to censure her were wrong. They should not have done that. The Democrats who did that, they should have taken their cues there from the leadership. And you might say, who cares? They never took the cues from the leadership before. They should blab. And maybe that's a reasonable expectation, but they probably also caught hell for doing what they did, not because, well, look, I'm not going to get in the way of telling you how to vote, but I am going to tell you how to be a Democrat. So,
but yes, recess.
Yeah, there's that. And this
is a leadership question. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And there will never be
process.
Such a resolution.
There is,
So all of these things probably should have been built into that. I made some comments about it on Blue Sky, but anyway, it's not that she's wrong to ask this question by any means and to prompt that response and say, well, maybe we should have someone offer this. Sometimes this is the way these things get started. But if you're looking for the reasons why a Tim Walberg, Republican, has the ability to say this sort of thing and get away with it, the answer actually lies with the people you didn't call Republicans. Are there some shaky Democrats? Do they need to be reminded of their shakiness? Yes. So in that sense, good call. But if you want to know whether there's going to be a resolution or how to get one, there's different calls to be making. So I just thought, from a procedural perspective, we point that out and say, yeah, certainly answering for I will be willing to sponsor such a censure resolution. None of these 22 sponsored the resolution against Tlaib. It was just there. They took it, and maybe they were even happy to do it, but they didn't bring the resolution. And they wouldn't have. And Jeffries wouldn't have allowed them to do it either. And had they just freelanced it, it wouldn't have seen the light of day because no leadership from the Democratic side would have put their weight behind it. So, anyway, I wanted to talk about that. You might have wanted something else. And now, whatever you want to do, in whatever direction you want to go. Although I will say, I tell everybody, I don't know if you heard me, but earlier I read your, let's see, I guess the latest from the front page, right after I read Paul Krugman's rhetorically headlined, "Will MAGA Republicans Block Baltimore's Rebuilding?" He seems to know that they will try and do that. You put
they'll
it plainly.
try to do it, definitely.
Yeah, I used yours as the answer. Yes.
What I'm interested in seeing is, I don't know if this is going to happen as soon as next week when they all come back. They have their traditional 2 weeks of spring break, come back next week where Ukraine is supposed to be the top priority. I don't know how soon we're going to get a supplemental funding request from the Biden administration on the bridge. They immediately released $60 million in transportation funding that was already there and could be rechanneled to the bridge. So I don't know, the timing on the administration's request for the money. Yes, the focus is supposed to be on Ukraine, where Johnson has come up with more bright ideas, innovations.
Okay.
On how not to spend the money, how to try to save his butt.
I see.
By bringing Ukraine aid and not having Marjorie Taylor Greene move to oust him. He wants to seize Russian assets and use that money, which, yeah, fine, go for it. But one of the problems is that a lot of those Russian assets are held by EU countries who, are working through a different process.
Yeah.
So
not
give
me
that
that
much
money.
of it is in the U.S. And we can't really force them to do it. He wants to end reverse Biden's hold on liquefied natural gas exports, which, that's not related at all, but, a bee in your bonnet. And he wants to make any funding loans rather than just straight ahead aid. So,
that's an interesting idea, if only because we've just been through that on two separate subjects, with the idea being, well, wink, wink, they're not loans, we're going to forgive them all. And I guess he could say, well, I don't know, that seems to work for you guys, even though it may not be his intention to forgive the loans. I don't know. But yeah, he'd put us in a tight spot there if we were going to say, well, no, that's not what we intended. Well, you use fake loans for other things. That's true. But you guys are the ones that say that it's horrific not to repay your loans, so, even though you guys stole all that PPP money. Anyway, I guess, all right, well, that's of interest. And yeah, I guess Ukraine was supposed to be the focus. We didn't know this was going to happen. And, this is what emergency supplementals are all about. But they just got finished doing the regular appropriating. And that was all they were able to concentrate on for months. And now we need another appropriations bill.
Again, partly because of Mike Johnson's crazy innovations with his laddered CR. Remember that?
Oh, yes.
It just drag everything out even more.
I wondered if that was what the innovation was going to be for Ukraine. Well, we'll give it to them in installments. Okay, maybe. We might end up doing that anyway, but so we are also waiting, I guess, for the administration. They're not late yet because Congress isn't even back. So right. I guess a funding request. I don't know. I don't know whether he feels like he has to wait to consult with them about what number they're expecting to see, or whether he can just unilaterally put one out there. But I could see waiting until they get back and having some conversations about that. And but he's done what he can do from the executive perspective, releasing immediate funds that will get, I suppose, emergency cleanup underway, if not the rebuilding of this bridge. But I expect that there'll certainly be a faction of Republicans who will simply say, I know it sounds crazy to block the rebuilding of this thing, but under the Mitch McConnell doctrine, anything that happens under a Democratic administration is a bad thing, and so don't let it happen. And we'll block it.
Well, they'll try to tie it to building a border wall. They'll say, sure, you can have it, but we need X amount of dollars going to border wall construction or some other crazy. Yeah, well.
So, Right.
Because it's going to be immigration, because it's always going to be immigration.
Yeah. I mean, if the bridge a bridge was knocked down by a boat, therefore DEI, then I guess it's not a long stretch to say, but also border wall. Got to have that. We'll spend the money thousands of miles away to do nothing and not actually accomplish anything. And how does that get collapsed steel rigging out of a river? I don't know. Doesn't. But we're going to demand it anyway. So if they're going to take that tack, I guess. Well, we have to deal with it, and hopefully, I don't know. We'll see whether citing it as malarkey gets us past that. I don't know. I went into the malarkey file, so now you have to give up. No, there'll probably something else, probably some other leverage. Other things more important to you? Do you want to add to the pile here? I mean,
there's just one other house thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how this happened in recess, and when this happened, but Rep. Mike Collins tweeted this morning that the House's 2025 budget resolution is passed out of committee and is ready to be brought to the House floor as soon as we're back in session. I guess they did it last week before they left. Week before last.
Yeah, I suppose that's possible.
So that's the House's top line numbers for the FY25 spending bills, which is very soon now.
Yeah, I guess so. This is about the time that they should normally be working on these things.
So, that's the other thing that's going to be heating up when they return. When they return, they will be there for 8 days, 8 legislative days.
All right.
And then take another week of recess.
Oh, well, it could be pretty exhausting, 8 days. That's 2 weeks in their counting. I mean, it's 14 days for the rest of us. It's 8 for them, but
which is the other problem, thinking back on Ukraine aid.
Yeah.
Because if they do manage to do this, then it has to go back to the Senate. So we're now looking at probably May before
the next
any
recess.
funds could get to Ukraine.
Yeah. Oh, and I imagine, I know that's kind of shocking, but now as you say it, that was probably their calculation on the Republican side. Oh, yeah, there's like 2 huge delays built in. So a 2-week Easter recess and probably 1 week later on. So, that's nearly a month by which we're delaying the aid, and what a fantastic thing. So, all right, it won't be happening anytime soon. We need an emergency supplemental.
Well, I don't know what it would take. The discharge petition I don't think is going to work. I mean, what obviously will happen is, or would be the most effective, most efficient, quickest, would be to Johnson say, okay, we're going to put the Senate's bill on the floor under suspension of the rules and see what happens. And it would pass.
And that, I guess that's a possibility. They do end up doing it occasionally.
It's a possibility. I don't think that's what he's going to do. And I think part of that is because of Marjorie Taylor Greene's motion to vacate that's sitting out there, ready to be activated.
Well, sort of, yeah. I mean, she didn't she didn't ask for it to be privileged, but I guess that's still something that's reparable. But
yeah, she can do that. Okay.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, I don't know that the Republicans are up for it. There's, of course, discussion that this time Democrats may say, "Meh, we're just not up for this game again."
They are, but they're going to want something in return. Yeah. And that something is going to be Ukraine aid.
Yeah. What a problem. All right. So yeah, if the Ukraine aid goes through, the people who want the chair vacated will be madder and want it gone. But then again, it's of no use to them so long as Democrats say, well, if we got the aid, then we'll vote to keep him. Or at least not vote to remove him anyway, and okay. I mean, structurally that works, and that's not the worst thing in the world. Marjorie Taylor Greene gets madder, and is thwarted by Democrats, and it drives her even further up the tree. Okay.
Well, and who knows what ripple effect you have of that then, in terms of other possible resignations by House Republicans.
Yeah.
As of April 19th, Johnson has his 1 vote margin.
Yeah, so coming up.
That's what Gallagher believes.
17 days until that happens. And they're on, they won't even be in for another 7 anyway. Right. So they'll return, and they have 10 days until he leaves.
Yes.
All right. Oh, and
8
he goes
legislative days until he leaves.
Right. Permanent recess for him. Okay.
So, this has to absolutely be part of every calculation. Yeah. The fact that Johnson he has no margin for error.
Yes. That's
and at any point, and he's very aware of this, at any point we could end up with Speaker Jeffries.
Yeah. And functionally, any day, I mean, I keep saying it, and I keep thinking, well, one day I'll just read the list of all people who are just absent for votes at random. And, it's generally speaking, I don't know, if things are normal, about 8 to 10 members total just miss every vote on any given day. Not all the time, every single one, same people, but a rotating
because
cast.
They all have the same family obligations as everybody else. They get sick like everybody else. Yeah. They,
forget, fall asleep, whatever it might be. Yeah, that's usually not it. But yeah,
435. Well, it's not 435.
Yeah,
but
that's another.
We'll
problem.
Use that hypothetically.
Right. I don't know how many people are in Congress.
435 people. Not everybody's going to be able to show up to work.
Right. Yeah. And, you can illustrate that for yourselves just by looking at the roll calls of any vote ever. And you'll see. Very rare that everybody's there. If there's less than 5 absent, either something extremely important was happening or it's an anomaly. But, yeah, there's always somebody. And when you have a 1-seat margin and 12 people out, anything could happen. If it happens that it's 11 Republicans and 1 Democrat, the outcome of votes is going to be completely different. And you got to realize that. I guess that's why they're doing everything by suspension of the rules.
No, they're doing everything by suspension because of the Freedom Caucus control over the Rules Committee.
That's true. That's definitely why they're avoiding them in the first place.
Because they can't get stuff out of the Rules Committee.
I guess what I'm thinking is
come up under a rule.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely the reason that they're doing it. Now I'm wondering whether they're not that worried about attendance all the time and cracking heads because you know what.
That's a factor too, yes.
We don't need you because the Democrats are going to supply the votes, which of course means that the legislation is more Democratic leaning, and ironically,
and that pisses more people off. And
like
with
vacate the chair.
the minibus, the final funding bills. He didn't even get a majority of the majority. He didn't get a majority of Republicans voting for it.
So the ultimate irony is that the Republican Freedom Caucus demand for 2 seats on the Rules Committee, which they got, has resulted in...
Well,
3? Oh.
But Tom Massey is not officially a Freedom Caucus member, but he is aligned with them and usually does their stuff. So that's where Ralph Norman is, by the way.
Ah, okay. That's why we hear him all the time. All right. So, but yeah, so as they said, we'll take 2 seats on the committee and 1 random lunatic from outside of our roster also has to go.
The House's answer to Rand Paul.
Yes. And so they can't. It's just amazing that resulted in more Democratic-leaning legislation. And who would have guessed it? I probably wouldn't have guessed, oh, yeah, well, they'll just bring everything to the floor under suspension of the rules, because that's just not the way it worked before. But now it does.
You don't do major legislating under suspension.
Yeah.
You don't.
But now you do, because and that was definitely an unanticipated result of what they thought was this tremendous political coup of securing seats for themselves on the Rules Committee, only to find it rendered a nullity. I guess I was wondering the other day, too, if there are times when there are enough absences that there's a functioning Democratic majority present that day, and they usually sort of take attendance with routine votes like the approval of the journal.
Right.
Can Hakeem Jeffries just say, well, one of these days I'm just going to say, I have a privileged resolution at the desk to reconstitute the makeup of the Rules Committee. For the balance of the 118th Congress, it should be an evenly divided panel. More seats need to be added. Democrats need to occupy it. And the payoff is you get to use the Rules Committee, and you got a 50-50 shot at maybe getting more Republican legislation to the floor than you're able to get with just suspensions. But
that's a brilliant idea.
Well, thanks. I wonder if it's cuckoo bananas, but I'm not certain where it goes eventually. But you say
it's slightly cuckoo, but it's certainly plausible it could happen.
Yeah, maybe it might be of interest, and then just say, then you can use the Rules Committee because it will take just one normie-ish Republican to join us to pass a rule. But then we'll have bipartisan rules coming out of the Rules Committee, and it's much better for you than bringing everything under suspension and having to cater to us on everything because we supply the bulk of the votes. On the other hand, some others may say, don't do that because this is working out pretty good. But you're only able to legislate on a very few things. And I wonder whether, and it might be of interest, and it might be it will certainly be funny to say, interesting, the response to putting 3 lunatic Republicans on the Rules Committee is, for the first time in 100 and something years, the Rules Committee is an evenly divided panel instead of overloaded in favor of the majority. But I wonder what would come of it. It stops short of saying, okay, I nominate myself as speaker and let's have a vote. Which you wouldn't do it that way anyway.
No, I think it's a perfectly reasonable suggestion. They should be counting every day how many Republicans are not here. Well, then let's just do this thing.
Yeah. And if you don't want to do it by replacing the speaker, because, I understand, point of pride for you guys, but how about we do it a committee at a time? And the Rules Committee might be a good place to start. And, maybe a couple of days down the road, you say, the Appropriations Committee should maybe be like that, too.
The Rules Committee is the most lopsided.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and that's, intentionally, obviously. But, it would be very interesting to see if you could make it work on one or another. It's better than, I don't know what we're doing now. Whatever it is now.
What they're doing now.
I think it might be better. Yeah. So it's something to game out and consider. But anyway, in the meantime, they'll come back from their recess. They need to deal with Ukraine. They'll be fighting about whether or not to get in the way of Baltimore. And I don't know what else, but I guess we'll entering the regular appropriations process, I guess.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
What a they must be exhausted, these appropriators, but and that's
Kay Granger just said the hell with this.
Yeah.
The appropriations chair. Yeah, she stepped down.
Okay.
She doesn't want to deal with FY25 appropriations.
I can't blame her. That's
and interestingly, Tom Cole, the Transportation Appropriations Committee chair, subcommittee chair,
right,
who was also chairman of the Rules Committee, wants that position. He wants to be appropriations chair.
Oh, okay.
So we got musical chairs happening on top of everything else.
Yeah, that'll be. You can't serve on both of those as chair.
I wouldn't think you could.
Although, I don't know. Jim Jordan's chair of 15 committees.
Yeah.
So maybe.
So
ordinarily not.
It wouldn't normally happen, but nothing's normal anymore.
Okay. That's true. All right. Well, I guess we'll see what happens. That's we're going to govern this way. I don't know. Roll the dice, and maybe we'll check back in a week and find out how it's going when they come back.
Movement? There won't have been.
No, not by that point. But yeah, we'll be setting up for a big week. Ukraine, yes or no? Baltimore, yes or no? Future of the Republic, yes or no?
Pretty much.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, thanks for joining us. Enjoy the tea. We'll be thinking about it. If anybody has any good suggestions or has experienced something similar. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, good luck to you in your quest to get back to coffee, just for your own enjoyment. Thanks for coming in, despite the fact that you can't have coffee at the moment.
You are most welcome.
We appreciate it, and we will see you next week. My
All
goodness.
Right,
okay, take care. Thanks, everybody, and thanks to Joan McCarter for stopping by. Of course, you can keep track of what's on her mind as things develop and as we return, getting a little bit closer to bringing Congress back into session, over at the Daily Kos front page. Now time for Justice.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
That's interesting, isn't it? Now time for Justice. Sounds like, we're bringing you Daily Kos now with 100% more justice on the front page, except we're talking about Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, which comes up next right here on Netroots Radio with the usual assortment of stories from around the country and around the world, including about 90% of everything I missed today.